justice for all.
Thank you. I'll do a quick roll call. Costa Bahal present. Rachel Silverman.
Present.
Mr. Stephen Kelly.
Present.
Thank you. Yep. And we also have both Trevor Kerman and Joe Ferraro joining as well. You want to put him on speaker? All right.
It's just gonna echo.
Yep. May I have a motion after you have reviewed the minutes to approve the minutes from the last meeting, please?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Motions from August 5th meeting have been approved. Do we have anything in public comment? Ali?
Any public comment?
No. Thank you. We don't need executive session, I believe. So at this point, we have two matters at hand that we wanted to discuss. And the first one, our council has a draft of the UTEP and other information we need. And I'll let Joe and Chris maybe walk through the items that they have modified, changed, or finalized. And the second item is a potential creation of a task force that we can discuss as well. First, maybe we can go to the housing item, Joe, if you have the moment, or Chris.
Joe, can you hear us? You might have.
Yeah, I have the. No, go ahead. Go ahead, Hillary.
No, I didn't know if you could hear us. Kostub had asked if council wanted to lead us through the draft of the housing UTEP.
The confidential draft for the UTEP.
Confidential draft.
Right. Well, I do have it in front of me.
Sorry.
A clean copy. The issue here is, I'm not sure what you have in front of you. Do you have the red line is pretty marked up?
No, it's the clean copy.
I did do. Okay. All right. So the 50,000. I didn't change anything substantively to the matrix that Hillary sent me. That was the result of discussions with the governance committee. What I did was I moved things around and I made some changes and added language to show the process. You know, for instance, our housing policy currently requires, at least at first blush, as a starting point, consents from the school, the town, and the county. I make that point in the early section of the matrix, so that the applicant is well aware of that issue right at the start of reviewing all of this.
It's okay. I can hear you.
So, but again, I don't. You've had this for several days. I could do a line by line if that's what you want me to do. But again, the idea of what I did here was to clean up, frankly, the language, make it more lawyer-like, and make sure that there were things in there that I thought should be in there, including the cross-reference to the housing policy and the consents. So with that, I'll open it up for what you want me to do. I can do a line by line if you want, but it's really a question of what the group wants me to do.
So Joe, I don't know if we need a line by line, but I think what would be helpful is any specific items that you thought that were most relevant and important that we should go over. And I know you mentioned consents, which relates to the local municipality and other entities. But if there was anything else that stood out to you that we should be mindful of, And I noticed that on page number 6 that we have, you also laid out the details that you just mentioned and the 3 points around what the policy is. Maybe we can quickly go through that itself, and then the board here can take over.
Let me ask you though, Joe, when someone comes to request funding, at what point would they do that? That's after they've gotten all of these consents? I mean, we're able to grant some of these things without all those consents, aren't we?
Yes, but it's whether we require them to do that, Steve, is within our discretion. And I think the struggle or the discussion, or at least part of the discussion on that point, is when does that happen? When is the board going to say, hey, we want you to get 3 consents, or we only want you to get 1 consent, or we don't want you to get any consents? The point I was trying to make in having the reference there was to put the applicant on notice. And from the board's perspective, when you get the application, you're going to sit down and say, okay, here's a project. These are the elements. These are the characteristics. And what do we as the board want by way of local consents? Do we want any? Do we want 1? Do we want 0?
Yeah, it would just seem to me that if we have the ability to unilaterally grant concessions, why would we require that to be at the beginning before they could even apply, before we'd even consider it? I mean, it would seem like we would look at the proposals and then we could ask them and tell them that we could decide then what we wanted them to get and by what time frame. But otherwise, I don't think we're going to see anything here. I think this is useless.
I would agree, Joe. I don't think we need to have the consents up front.
I don't think I'm being clear.
That's what he's asking.
You get the application, and that's when you make the decisions.
Right.
I mean, you can't make a decision unless you have the application, because you don't know what the project is. Right.
So we're not asking for the consents before. And in fact, I would say, should we be asking for consent, or should we be saying no objection?
Those are
our UTEP and our housing policy both say consent.
Okay.
And, and we could certainly amend those. And there's been discussion about that also.
Yeah.
So,
but I guess I just want to understand that in order for them to qualify as a project, they would have to get all those before they came to us. That's what this says, isn't it?
No, that's not what that says.
Okay, then I misunderstand.
That's not what that says.
The second, the paragraph that starts with all proposed, in the second line, it says such requirements under the UCIDA housing policy may include the requirement to obtain. So that's where that discretion of the board comes in, is the language around we may require it. And this gives you kind of back in the driver's seat to be able to evaluate the project and say, you know what? And we'd like to ask the project to go back and get the consent of, let's say it's the town, or it could be a situation where it's the school district you're asking, but you have, as the board, the discretion to evaluate that project.
And furthermore, there's no timing. There's no time provision put in those 2 or 3 sentences.
Okay.
All I'm saying is generally we need consent. They may need consent.
Or maybe not. It depends on what we think. But yes, that sounds fine.
But it's not a prerequisite.
After the application comes in.
Well, may means maybe yes, maybe no. Correct. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm good with it.
All right. So anything else that, Joe, we should be mindful of on either the matrix or the language as well that we should discuss before we even move to the motion for recommendations?
Well, give me a second. Sorry.
Yep.
Let me just.
So while you're going over that, Joe, one of the things that you had brought up to me that some of the language in here is consistent with other language in our other policies, and from a legal perspective, consistency has been important when there have been legal challenges to, you know, some of the IDA things. So that's just something to keep in mind too.
Yeah, no, I think if you look at the three bullets are what was in the draft that I got from Hillary, namely the affordable housing set aside is satisfied one of three ways. One, if there's a New York State or federal requirement, that's the first bullet. The second bullet is if there's a local ordinance imposed by a village, city, or town. And then the third is a separate affordable housing set aside established by the IDA in connection with their review of the application.
That's right. That all looks good. That's what we talked about.
Yeah.
And then at the end, if you go to the last page of the language, you'll see that I at least put in general terminology the concept that was discussed at the last governance meeting about how the abatement percentages work.
Yep.
Namely, that there's the varying percentage table applied to the so-called market portion of the housing project, and then the first percentage deals with, or the first percentage is applicable to the affordable set aside, and that's set for the balance of the pilot.
Right.
Yes, thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe. Do we need to discuss anything on, not to take away, but anything
So
from
the
planning,
point
etc.?
to discuss,
Yep.
I think where there's still, you know, maybe have governance kind of think over, is on page 7. When you look at the matrix that was created, this was reflective of the conversations had in governance. But we wanted to kind of focus on what are we determining for the affordable unit set aside? How are we determining that affordability? And so I don't know if people have been following some of the articles in the newspaper about right now affordable units, if you use 30% of 80% of the county AMI, is actually above fair market rent right now. So I spoke with Kai in our planning department to get a little more information. I did ask him Kostip had a few more questions I haven't heard yet on that, some of those other metrics. But he said there are 2 ways you can measure affordability, is that you can use the kind of that HUD standard of you take the AMI for the county, let's just, to make math easy, say it's $100,000 a year. You would take 80% of that, being $80,000 a year, and then that household would not spend more than 30% of their gross income on rent. So that's the first metric you can look at for affordability. The other thing you can do is look at fair market rental. So right now for a 1-bedroom or a studio, I can't remember, the fair market rent is $1,100 a month. But when you use the 80% metric, it's coming out to $1,700 a month. So there's a gap in what the affordability is versus what the fair market rent is. So he said another way to look at this is you could say at the time of renting the unit that it has to be rented at the 80% or fair market rent, whichever is lower. And then that helps lock in that affordability when that unit is being rented out.
But it doesn't protect anyone if the math comes out the way it does now. Am I following that right?
So if we just stuck to so I think if I'm following your question correctly, back up for a second. My understanding from Kai, when they do this in the lease, when they rent out that unit, so let's say 10% of those units are affordable, when that unit gets rented out, then that number has to be based on whatever that metric is today.
And
Not-
if the metric is higher,
If
Than the
it's
fair
higher than the
market.
fair market rent, then people don't really know, we're not really benefiting anyone because
Correct.
it's really now market rate housing.
Correct.
So if we go with the lower metric, we're always kind of preserving the affordability as AMI may jump up or fair market rate may stay flat. Like, so we kind of, in a way, insulate the affordability because on a, let's say, a 15-year pilot, those numbers could kind of go like this. And so this way we're not letting one run away and we lose the ability to offer affordable units because we've locked into one metric. So that was
So
a
did we-
suggestion from planning.
So would we continually redo that math?
So we would do the math, and I think they would have to do the math annually, and then we would just monitor
Okay.
that whatever they were using for that rental for that unit matched the lower of the two. And then what's in the rental agreements that the county monitors, because they do something similar with their housing policy, I forget what they're calling it, is that there is language in the rental agreement that protects the tenants, and then they can call and report if they're being given, an
Excessive rent
unfair
increase.
or their rent is not, they're trying to, let's say fair market sitting below, and they're trying to be given the 80%, it protects them, and they have a number they can call to
it's the
report
less
that.
of?
It's the lesser of, would be a way to protect the affordability
So it
component.
would be 80% of,
AMI.
30%
30% of that 80%
so
will
it's
be spent on housing.
30% of 80%
Yeah.
of AMI. So that's one way, and the other one is,
Fair market value of the
Yeah.
rent.
or fair market value?
Yep.
Of the rent, yeah.
And how does fair market value get determined?
So both of these, from my understanding from Kai, is that these are published annually or regularly by HUD. So they look at your area and they do whatever math behind the scenes, and they
that-
put out this
They do
number.
math.
Is-
They do
is-
math.
I'm sure they do math, but is that done by county? Or
Yeah,
is it done by city?
I think
or is
it's
it-
done by county because it's that fair market rate number is tied into housing Section 8 vouchers.
Correct.
So if I have a Section 8 voucher and I'm going to get a 3-bedroom because I have 2 kids or whatever, I cannot rent above the fair market rate. And so it's tied into Section 8 metrics, which again helps protect affordability because now someone with a voucher could access that unit.
So there's only one number for the entire county,
For fair
For fair
market,
market.
fair market.
depending on size. So there's one for studio,
Well,
one
yeah,
for,
but,
Yeah.
Yes, there's,
the number
Yeah,
in
that's-
Kingston is the same as the number in
correct,
Venetian.
which is the question.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
the one in, so I mean, this would seem like we have.
Right.
I would, I live near New Paltz, which probably has a higher.
Yeah.
Fair market value because there's such competition
Yes.
with, whatever it is, 15,000 students.
And
It's different.
to your point, the number might be actually skewed.
Well, it is.
And that's what we were talking about. And so 2 things. One question you were asking, are we tied to a certain number? We're not tied to the number. We are tied to the numbers provided by a certain entity. We're tying to the language.
Yes.
The language tying was also relevant because I believe Kai mentioned something about IRS metric as well.
Oh, that was Joe. Joe had
Joe?
mentioned that there is also an IRS metric for affordability.
Joe, did you want to bring that up a little bit more in terms of how we can tie these to either entities and which
Sorry,
one?
Costa, what did you say?
Oh, for understanding the affordability component and what the AMI, et cetera, the definition of that should be or could be, there was one definition that we were just thinking about or talking about, that's 80% of the gross income of that 80%, 30% can be spent on housing. And I believe there is a similar definition by IRS, but uses different numbers that you might have mentioned to Hillary at some point. And I thought if you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, they were all income based.
Right.
You know, it was 60% AMI and I don't have that excerpt in front of me, but it was but again it was income based.
Mhm.
It didn't look at the, and again that third bullet doesn't spell out how you're defining affordability, right? There was I think I bracketed the 120.
Yeah.
You know, so what we could do is we could, you know, if you're uncomfortable putting an actual number in, we could you know, just make a reference to a percentage as determined by the IDA, you know, in connection with this, with discussions with the applicant. Because part of the tension here is that you don't want to have so many, I mean, the policy here is laudable, obviously, right? You're requiring the developer in return for the granting of financial assistance by the IDA, a set aside of affordable units. But it also has to be done, obviously, in the context of making the project pencil, right? And
Yes.
so there may be some need for some actual, you know, discussion and review of pro formas and some financial analysis before you come up with an actual number. I mean, 20% may work as a set aside, but it may not work. Maybe it can only support 15, you know, but that'll be, and that could be something that you arrive at as you review this with the developer. And you review all that with the developer.
So affordable is not as easy to define. You know, what's affordable, because the county is not a monolithic block. It has different communities where what's affordable in one might not be within reach in others, because nobody, you know, there won't.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Steve, and that further demonstrates that maybe, you know, unless you had 50 projects lined up so that you could come up with a set of guidelines that would cover, and because of the mass, you would have enough mass to look at projects. It might be better to have, you know, general language there saying something to the effect of that's determined by the IDA.
Well, here's
Because
where
you're
I'm
absolutely
thinking,
right. What's market in Ellenville is not market in Kingston. You know,
it really
Correct.
isn't. It isn't. Ellenville
which
is
is not market in New Paltz.
Very different.
quite different. And it would be hard to say that well, anyway, you know, where the need is, I think we have need everywhere. So
Everywhere,
there's
yeah.
no shortage of need. But it would seem to me that if we were to do an affordable housing project in New Paltz, we wouldn't want the affordable people to be independent, suddenly declaring themselves independent students who would then qualify, because that really wouldn't be addressing the need that we're trying to get to. So that's where I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
So I think what we
Agreed.
should do is
Yeah, agreed, sure.
we should leave some discretion to the board to work with developers to use our judgment. I mean, that's not what we're here for. If we have things that are absolutely cut and dry, then you have no flexibility to address, you know, if we need affordable housing in Shandaken because they build a new, you know, a big hotel there or something, and there's just no, you know, everything is large lots with hundreds of acres and, you know, individual mansions on them, which is not a stretch there. There's no place for working people to live, and that's what we're looking at. We need to have affordable housing for working people and people who aren't working.
Right, And we've talked about looking at the developer's pro forma and analyzing the rate of return. That
Yep.
could be part of this analysis.
Yeah.
That would be in the application, right?
We could delete out that reference to the actual percentage and put in and insert some language that talks about discretion and review by the IPA.
I think that would be good, but there should be the implication that more affordability equals greater support and more points. So, which is what we have. So maybe we just leave those percentages, and the actual, what we determine to be affordability
Yes.
is determined by the project.
Yes.
And then we can say, listen, we can give you more help, but you're going to need to get over 20% instead of under 20%, because that's where we give you more points. And so then they can sharpen their pencil and work through it.
I would be
So
more,
we should just leave it the way it is. I think this is good. It doesn't
Yeah.
say what affordable is. That gives us some flexibility to look at the project and the community and the needs.
and also which year it is, right? Each year the numbers are changing.
And you could, if, let's say it is a project in Ellenville, we
Yes.
could have the developer go by the Ellenville AMI
Yes.
and not allow them to
That's
use
right.
the county. We could
And
really,
that's what-
That would
Yeah.
make a lot more sense
Yes.
because the county's
Right.
not one.
because it's not the
monolithic-
same
Yeah.
median, right?
No,
Which
it's
would
not.
address, I think, exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yes. So we keep
Right,
what
that
we
would be-
have, and then we avoid the AMI component and agree on that. So that
Yeah.
allows us the flexibility. And that also allows us to look at not only communities, but also which year we are in.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
and then we could, so we'll leave the points, right?
Yep.
Based on affordable in,
Mhm.
but the affordability, we will determine per project, what
Right.
makes
That's where we have
sense.
discretion.
Yeah, because to put fair market rentals in Ellenville would be out of reach. We
Correct.
wouldn't hit any
Well,
affordability.
if affordability was based on the county, where
Yeah.
most of
You're
the
not gonna catch.
river communities are more affluent
Yes.
than than, say, Ellenville. That isn't really fair because the need is very great there.
Yes.
And I'm sure it's great in other places too, so I'm not diminishing that, but it would price it out. It would be, nobody would be able to build affordable housing there that people could rent because it's just, the market is different there.
And I think as a board, giving the developer on those affordable units, that whatever the pilot is to start on the real property tax, to keep that flat, to me is a pretty good incentive to say, that tax on those units is not going to be going up
Right.
for the life of the pilot.
Right.
So that's,
100%, yeah.
a way to help them
Help
pencil all
them get
this
more of
in.
them in.
Yeah.
Which is what
And that's why we
That's our
want
goal.
the return calculation.
Exactly. So, okay.
All right, we're good.
All right, one nit
Yep.
I wanted to ask you all about. 10% in the last column, I'm fine with. And this is a nit, not a change. 20 to 49, or since there's a gap of 1% between 49 and 50%, should we change it to 49.99, or what should we do with that?
Well, it should be greater than 49% would be more correct.
Right? So
Okay.
maybe that just,
So instead of at
Change
least
that.
50%, it
Correct.
should be greater than 49%. It's a good catch.
it's a small catch, but
It's a good one though.
Thank you.
Otherwise, it's.
First project would have fallen right in that.
yeah, right in that 1%. Where do we put it?
Where's the tipping point?
That's right.
Well done.
All right.
Can I
So-
ask a
yes,
question on
please.
this matrix? So it's just me, I don't understand it. Project must earn an additional 4 points based on the metrics below. And then you can either get 1 point, 2 points, or 3 points. What am I missing?
It goes to the right also.
Yeah.
So, you get 1, 2, or 3 points for any of the
Anything.
things in the row.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, so you can get more than 1 point.
Correct.
Oh, yeah, you could probably get 50 off this.
Okay, all right, that's the part I was missing,
yeah.
thank you.
Yep.
All right.
Which is good to know because we also want this to be readable and understandable by potential projects. So if it's, if
Maybe
they're
we should-
like,
Maybe
Maybe we
we
should
should say
clarify-
that.
yeah,
I
say
read
that,
it
that's
way
right.
The first time I
Yeah.
saw the matrix.
I think we
I
should
thought the
clarify
same.
that, yeah.
Since I looked at this when I got here, I'm trying to figure it out. I said, don't ask a question, don't ask a
No,
question.
ask.
And then I was like, well, I don't
You
get it.
have to ask
I have to
a
ask
Please
a
ask questions.
We all had the same question.
Yes.
Somehow we need to say that top row
Yeah.
are 1
Right.
point
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, add that clarity.
And part of this is me trying to get it on one page, so this would not be the final. We would definitely add some
It
clarity.
might help if we just put a point summary.
So on the application
Yeah.
too, it is a little bit clear, all of these things, at least on our current application, each box is kind of its own thing, and then at the bottom it will total the points.
Right.
So it's a little bit clearer how to earn points
Okay.
and what your points are.
So as I'm reading this right now, we don't have any major changes to this.
No.
And from a next step standpoint, to me, the only thing that remains is to be changed in the application to include the return calculation request, right?
Yep, I think before we get there, and I'll lean on Joe and Chris for this, do we give notice and the opportunity for the taxing jurisdictions to give comment? We don't have to respond to comment, but I think there may be some, giving drafts.
To our policy?
So I think I'll just let Joe answer about notifying, taxing jurisdictions in regards to changes to a UTEP policy.
Why would
Sure,
you do it? They
thanks,
don't give
Lori.
us
I'll-
any that they're doing.
Joe, do you want me to take this or you got it?
Yeah, I'm gonna take it, but put you on the spot, Chris. Yeah, I got a smile on my face. The statute. Actually, what we need to do is sorry, we should probably, and maybe Chris, can you pull up the Ulster County UTEP quickly? That's on the website. Because there's probably an amendment, there might be an amendment provision in there, and I just can't remember that off the top of my head. The general rule that the Ulster County has and I think it's because there isn't one. The general format that the Ulster County IDA has done with respect to amendments to its UTEP is to actually hold a public hearing and to notify directly each of the taxing jurisdictions, because pilot agreements are so controversial with municipalities and affected taxing jurisdictions. Putting them on notice that we're making a change is, frankly, it's good practice and good politics. And the reason I was kind of laughing about with Chris is that he's in the middle of a fairly major amendment to a UTEP that he's handling with another one of our clients, a large county, and we are walking them through that, and it's been very controversial. And Chris has been spending a lot of time with answering comments and letters from affected taxing jurisdictions, et cetera, and that frankly has supported the decision to go through that process, because to do it without it, and in effect surprise the municipalities would not have been a good result. So our recommendation would be to hold a public hearing and to notify people. But I'll pass it on to Chris for his to elaborate.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything specific in the UTEP about amendments to the UTEP. But I echo everything Joe has said. Obviously, the idea here is transparency. Talk to the tax jurisdictions, get as much input from them as possible before you do anything, especially related to a pilot. As much as I'm getting driven absolutely nuts by the tax jurisdictions up here with one of our county IDAs on this process.
Yep.
It's the right procedure to do from our standpoint. It's documents everything. It looks good from the ABO's governance perspective, looking down on all the A's and looking for problems. It's building your fortress walls a little higher, protect the IDA.
Okay. So from a procedural standpoint, would we do that once we recommend to our board, that this is what we're proposing and we're recommending, or would we do it? At what stage should we do that?
I would think we would make the recommendation to the full board.
Right.
The full board would consider it and
Then go for it.
and probably approve it. And as part of the approval process, we would notify everyone and have a public hearing to discuss what we had kind of decided, and we can amend it then, if it's necessary.
If need be.
Yeah, we handle it a little differently. We would typically have the governance committee recommend the changes to the UTEP. We adopt a resolution by the full IDA board saying, we're going to move forward with holding a public hearing with respect to the amendment to the UTEP. We hold the public hearing here from the tax jurisdictions, and then after that, once we get all the input, then the IDA would go ahead and decide whether or not to adopt an approving resolution and amending the UTEP. That's typically how we handle it. We get the input first, the public hearing first.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we, just from a logistics standpoint, does the public hearing need to be held multiple times in different taxing jurisdictions, or can we hold one public hearing?
It's a great question, and you could hold one public hearing. The annoying part is logistically you need to send out notice to all the different tax jurisdictions because you're a county IDA,
Right.
so it has to go out to the legion of different tax jurisdictions that could be affected by an amendment, which we can certainly help with that, handle that process, help as much as the IDA needs, but you just have to kick the tires on that a little bit to make sure that all the tax jurisdictions receive notice, but you can't hold just one public hearing.
Okay, great.
So we can
And
get to that.
And sorry, Hillary. From a historical standpoint, the county IDA has just held one public hearing for each of the UTEP amendments that it did over the last 10, 15 years. So yes, just one public hearing.
Okay.
So that way, we have our meeting tomorrow.
Next week.
Next week, not tomorrow. We can, if we agree, we can recommend
Mhm.
to the full board the UTEP and these changes, and then the next step would be to notify everyone.
Yep.
And ideally, I don't know how much notice is required.
30 days, right?
Can we do 10? I think.
I mean, it'd be better to have it so we would have the responses before the meeting after that.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, you require 10 days notice for the public hearing, but you can certainly push past that and give that notice period. That's not a problem.
Well, we can have everything ready to go and maybe set it for like 2 weeks. So we'll mail it and then it'll be 2 weeks. So they're kind of, by the time they get it in the mail, and we'll send it out by email too. But by the time they get in the mail, then they have the full 10-day notice.
And that's all before the October.
And that way it'll be
Well-
done before October.
Would there be any possibility that governance might have to meet after the hearing date lapses or concludes, whatever the correct term is?
Before the next
Meeting.
meeting.
Well, governance probably, if there was, I would expect that we would get some feedback and that we would want to consider, and we may want to have governance.
That's what I was just
Kick
thinking.
it back to governance to look at it again.
Right.
Okay.
Depending on the feedback. So it's probably a 2-month approval process. If the full board agrees, which it looks like it's possible that could happen.
Right.
Then we would send out the notice to everybody, and we'd ask them for their response. At the next meeting, we would have it for the next governance meeting, so we'd know what they responded.
Yep.
And then we could recommend to the board changes, and that might be it, or we may have another iterative process where we might want to send them an update of what we were about to decide, and then it would be a 2-month process. I think that would be more appropriate. I mean, we ask for their feedback, we make some a new proposal, and then we ask for their feedback again, and then after that, we make any finalized, because I see your point. We don't want to end up rushing something and then finding that we've missed something ourselves.
What if
And I
we, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was simply going to say I would agree, because you have one meeting, then if we have to meet again after we hear from the authorities, then we would go to the board, recommend something, and then we can adopt afterwards. So I think 2 months is at least the number.
Yeah,
So
unless there's no feedback.
Right, unless there's no
Do we
feedback,
wanna-
that's right.
Then we could just approve it in
That's
the
right.
next meeting.
So what if we put a governance meeting on the agenda for right before the board meeting in October?
Correct.
That way, if there was not a lot of feedback, you guys are ready to confirm and move it
Right.
forward. Okay.
Correct.
So,
The next one is October 16th, I think. Is that right?
yeah, I think it's the 16th.
Yeah, so maybe a week before that, at least.
Or even just before the meeting.
Right
'cause
before
she
Oh,
needs
right
to have
before the
time.
meeting, that day? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, I
fine.
mean, we're gonna
30 that morning.
You're
That's
gonna be able
I
to
mean-
send it to us in advance. So we
That's
know
fine.
what it is.
And
Yes.
And we can
You're
have the
not-
governance committee and invite everybody.
And are you guys, I don't know, would governance be required to attend the public hearing? I mean, I'll go, but
No,
yeah, I would say they probably may not want to go either. What's your recommendation for that?
you're happy to attend, but, usually for the UTEP amendments I've worked on, we prepare scripts, we set up the public hearing, and the executive director or the CEO reads from the script, set the public hearing, the other board members aren't there. Again, totally up to you folks.
I think that,
I would follow your recommendation.
yeah, I think that's good.
But at least,
Yeah.
yeah. But then we'd at least have, I mean, I can obviously give feedback before then, but at least you guys can get that feedback
Yeah.
prior to the October
That's right.
meeting. So,
Right.
If there's modifications made based on feedback, do you have to have another public hearing or just one?
I don't think.
It's a good question. If there is significant feedback, if there's significant feedback and there's a lot of changes, you might want to consider holding a new public
Yeah,
hearing.
that's what I was thinking.
Yep,
2 months
that's why
cycle.
2 months,
If there was a lot of changes.
Yep.
I'm not seeing that being that likely, but then, we haven't been through this before, so I don't know.
You just don't know what the other entities
That's
are saying.
They may have some interesting things that may be, really worth changing, so.
That might be new.
Would you recommend when we have the public hearing that we also give context and understanding of like just basic what IDAs do and how we wouldn't?
No.
No, okay. I just don't want to have to weed through a lot of comments that maybe are not relevant to because just of a lack of understanding.
You should just
I mean,
focus,
you can set,
yeah, you could,
kind of open
Council
Pandora's
rules.
box to do
No,
that,
you're
but
right, okay.
You're gonna have a 2-hour-long public hearing.
Yeah.
The intricacies of IDAs, I wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah,
All right, got it.
you just focus on what we're changing.
Right.
What we're changing and
only the
then
amendments in the UTEP metrics.
we'll do the public hearing.
That's right.
Okay, I think this is very helpful. Thank you, Chris and Joe.
All right.
So I would make a proposal that we present this to the full board next week, have another discussion with the full board, and if the board is comfortable with this as a recommendation, then we would empower our executive director, well, actually, this is what the full board would probably do, would empower Hillary to mail that out and to schedule that public meeting.
I second
So
that.
raising a motion. Not
That's a motion.
Right, and I second.
All right. Motion accepted. Thank you. Hillary,
It's just-
do we need a?
Just to close the loop, so we'll prepare a public hearing resolution for the board for the full board to consider.
Yes, please.
Just authorizing holding a public hearing with respect to these amendments to the UTEP.
Yes, please.
Right.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Yep.
I know
So-
we're upside down, but that is a thumbs up.
We're up.
So
Yeah,
all
I
in,
don't know.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, so we'll do that. Anything else that we need to do in terms of this particular item, Hillary?
I don't think so, Joe or Chris. Am I missing anything that needs to be done administratively to move this along?
We voted, everything is, all right, perfect.
I must be killing Joe at the top. I'm stealing.
We'll take another, look at this from an attorney standpoint and have it all nice and polished for you for the Wednesday meeting. Yes.
All right,
Yep.
thank you.
Thank you both.
So that concludes that matter for this time. This next one is interesting as well, which I like because it's moving in the right direction and the next steps. So we've been talking about and thinking about energy developments and how it's morphing and changing. And that can also create a lot of job opportunities and other potential benefits to the community. So we thought it might be a good idea to have somebody like Trevor, who has a lot of knowledge of it, to lead a task force to understand not basically the fundamental dynamics, but also what is possible, what is currently existing in the community, what we can use, and what could be beneficial, both from the local standpoint and also what he has seen from other communities that he has been in. But I'll hand it over to Hillary.
Sure.
Because you had a few discussions with Trevor as well.
Yes. So just to keep everyone in the loop, we've been talking about forming a task force around sustainability, environmental, energy issues, and we had discussed that at the last meeting. And so Trevor and I have moved forward with that, and we had our first official meeting this past Friday, and I wrote out a little summary that I'll kind of go over with you, and then we'd love to hear input on how you also think we maybe could make this more effective or other things that we should consider. So our goal is to look at energy from a very broad perspective. So we're going to look at jobs, what are jobs in that field? What are some of the other economic development incentives and initiatives that are going on? What are things that are important from an environmental standpoint, from renewables, from what our energy capacity really is, and how does that look? And then how can Ulster County kind of be a player in this and make sure that when that train's leaving the track, we're on it. So we came up with some action items and to kind of help suss this out. And the first thing we'd like to do is host a focus group. And we'd like to invite a mix of community leaders, people knowledgeable about energy in our area, people who know a lot about environmental sustainability, workforce, what our training, our infrastructure is. We really want to hear from the community about all of these things instead of, me and Trevor guessing. From there, we wanted to do some basic asset mapping. I know that very involved asset mapping typically involves like a team and a lot of people that we don't necessarily have at this point, but we felt it was doable to kind of put together what are some sites, what does the energy capacity at those sites look like, what is our population right now, what's our workforce look like, education, infrastructure. We wanted to examine industry sectors. We wanted to get some broader data on renewables, grid scale, all of these things, look at what then our strengths and weaknesses are, and identify our necessary partners, look at kind of, what is the feasibility. So let's say the next big thing, or the biggest thing right now, may be the need to skill up wind turbine operators. Well, we don't have any wind turbines here in Ulster County, so that may not be a feasible road for us to go down, even if it's a big need right now.
Maybe
so
we could help Central Hudson buy good billing software.
There we go. Billing software.
No comment.
Yes, yeah.
You
And
mean
then,
to lower the distribution costs?
we do want to invite Central
All right, fair
Hudson
enough.
to our focus group, and so we'd love to have some input from them. Another action item is we'd really like to put together a one-pager, and that's really for you guys to be able to review just right in front of you. What are some policies? What are some best practices? Kind of what's going on in this area.
What is our, in a nutshell, what are we trying to accomplish?
Okay, that's the best part. That's the next one. Okay. So then we're going to do all of this, and we want to present our findings to you. And so then what recommendations do we have to the IDA in terms of what's out there, what's happening, and do our policies align with that? So if, let's say, right now we see in 20 years these being a need, we've got this Micron project coming in, and these are some ways that Ulster County can be on that train. Do we have policies and procedures that incentivize that to happen? Because that's what the IDA can do, right? We can incentivize projects. So are we actually incentivizing what we want to see happen here? And so we'd like to then hopefully make some recommendations. Let's say, and I'm making this up because I haven't done any of this work yet, but let's say all renewable projects have to be built on brownfields. Well, if we don't give any points for a brownfield, how can we say,
It'll be built
hey,
on a cornfield.
yeah, hey, come and build this here. Ulster County would be a great place to have your energy efficient business. But if we're not doing anything to make that attractive, then we're not really, we're not going to be on the map when someone's doing site selection or looking to bring those businesses here.
So is our goal to attract companies that generate energy or that make parts for that? Or is our goal to have criteria for funding other types of projects that include energy?
I think this is the layer of determining what that goal should be.
Okay.
So yes, so
Right, that's
basically the objective would be to identify the need, identify what needs to be available to fill that need, and
Okay.
then recommend what we
Yep.
can do.
Well, that's good.
So we're just trying to do
Yeah,
the
yeah.
What the
legwork
charge is.
Yeah.
before we bring it to you at governance and say, oh, it'd be a great idea. Let's have a policy that does X, Y, Z. You guys spend months, we have a public hearing, and we get no
Yep.
projects because it wasn't really the policy that we needed to have.
I mean, this sounds like incredibly valuable data once it is all gathered.
We're hoping.
Is there not a department, a different county department that if we're not doing it, would want to maybe partner with us so that we have a team to help
Yes.
with that asset
And
mapping?
then
talked
where
about
we're,
that briefly.
we're kind of,
Yes, exactly.
we have to
Right.
figure it all out. And so one of the things we'd like to do is really start to kind of say, like, well, who are these partners? Who's doing this here in the county? Are they working with the IDA?
Especially for asset mapping and state.
It's
Yeah.
very cross, frankly, including some of the federal programs too,
Correct.
honestly. But certainly state level down to county there's a lot of incentive, not just incentives, but a lot of pre-designed policy. You just touched on if you don't have a brownfield, it's in a cornfield, and there's an issue. There's obviously an issue with agricultural land use. There's also some great best practices developed elsewhere about that are getting a lot of
Yes,
traction.
exactly.
So it's the kind of things like, is it an information gap or is it a policy gap? And so is there some education that goes with it too? So that'll be part of this.
So it's very good to educate ourselves. I'm certainly 100% with that. And I guess in the end, our job is to create economic development. So I just was wondering, and maybe it's premature, as to what how we're going to create jobs out of this, so that's.
So it is perhaps premature, but Hillary and I did have a discussion, Steve, and for the benefit of since we had the discussion,
Mhm.
what we were discussing is where should those opportunities fall really? And we don't know the answers to that yet. But the two categories would be, of course, manufacturing and the post-manufacturing, which is service.
Mhm.
And so in addition to the policies, which I don't know about, I would also like to understand, and I think Hillary knows, and Trevor and I will talk as well, what are the things other places, other communities have done that worked well for them or did not, so we don't do them? So not only
Okay.
where we should go, but also how we should do it as well, I think would be a good
Right.
idea.
Right. So I think that was well said. One side, there's trying to recruit either energy generating companies or companies that manufacture parts that go into energy generation. Maybe the blades for the turbines for the wind generation, just going with that, even if we never build any here. That would be valuable for us. It would create jobs.
Or chips or
Chips.
sensors, anything.
Right.
And there is, as Costa just pointed out, I don't want to say this to be frightening, but electricity is a lot like housing in the sense that you need it consistently everywhere all the time. We don't really have so there's a service layer.
Right, there's a
and
service
there
layer.
is an ongoing real-time 24/7 service layer, O&M layer.
Yes.
And for the facilities, and then if you just, if you wanted to, I don't know, you build 10 solar farms.
Right.
In real time, somebody has to manage those assets to the grid, right? There's a grid operator, and you got to give the grid operator data and insight into how your operations, and you got to be on top of it while it's operating. so those are permanent positions, but there's also obviously, the construction jobs, the same as there is with housing on the projects themselves. And then the more of those, the reality is the more of those projects that exist, the more likely you're to have somebody, light manufacturing perhaps. I don't know how much we are trying to, there are other policies trying to onshore that manufacturing and the other components, but like solar panels. But we'll see what happens with that first. But first,
I don't know a lot about the space, but we have.
But you have all
who's
those.
a manufacturer
Yep.
who could help us with that. I don't know about that. I'm a healthcare guy, but I just trying to see where we're going. That's all.
Yeah, but
So there's the distribution. Isn't the distribution though largely controlled by Central Hudson?
Yes.
So nothing that we could do about that, is there? Unless they came to us and asked for money.
It's giving me some PTSD from my discussions with utilities in California. There are sets of policies, and these are typically state level policies and directives in this state. The system operator, New York ISO, NYSERDA, and so on, set the operating parameters. The utility is a regulated entity, has to participate in those as well, to the varying degree of how much they want to in any given moment. It's obviously, they have to make their own business decisions. But but yes, they would be partners in this.
One thing I was just going to go back to, I do like the aspect that it's sustainability, not just energy.
Yeah.
So I think it's more long term, and also perhaps it's not just about the current way we do things, but also potentially if there's a new technology coming, should we be focused on that, or should there be incentives for that versus something else? I think we should be able to cover a lot of those things.
Very interesting. We had alternative.
Correct. Like
alternative fuel
recently.
cells of some type that we could create energy for a site. So Joe's manufacturing company or my hospital could have its own power generation if that made sense.
Yeah, correct. Absolutely.
Or even assembly. There's a company that I worked with a while ago, well, not directly, Bloom Energy, right? They have these big packs, like a big generator pack, the size of this room perhaps, and they have an anode and a diode basically, and they generate electricity just by using a chemical on a metal. And they're used by large companies, large tech companies, to power their whole operations, like Apple, Google, and all those. And some countries actually do that.
Wow.
So that's just an example. My point is, I think we should think about how can we do this sustainably for the long term, and both from an economic development standpoint, but also continued economic development that is distributed and diversified.
Yeah. Okay, I'm really into this.
No, we're excited, and Trevor's been great. I feel like I'm going to learn a lot from this. And, Jen, when she came and spoke, the county executive to the board, she mentioned sustainable jobs, clean jobs, green jobs. I know the county is still kind of operating off the 2040 plan, but, this is up and coming, and I think this is a focus. And so we want to make sure that the IDA is working, together with the county on helping to move these initiatives along.
And we get on the map as well. If we're showing some initiative, we get on the map, and it may not be just a job, but perhaps we identify that, hey, we need to train these many people to actually get to that point as well. So I think it might have a lot of benefits.
Do you need some resolution from us?
We already voted it. We were really giving an update. An update that the committee is formed. We've met with Trevor, and then we'll I think, probably just continue to give updates. I don't want to spend forever on this. So we would.
5 of us here, so it shouldn't need,
Yeah. So we're hoping to kind of have this put together to present to the board, before the end of the year. That's our hope.
And I think planning
very promising.
Planning would be the best place to start as well, because asset mapping, etc., will be helpful there.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing I'd just like to mention to your point, Trevor, that we need power all over. It's got to be quality power and all that. Yeah. Just recently, I think it's 2 weeks ago, this Friday, it sounded like the Council of Industry was facilitating this, but I really think Adam Bosch from Pattern for Progress really put it together. So they pulled together business people from both sides of the river. We were asked to participate, started out as a Zoom meeting. Central Hudson actually was part of it, which I was surprised.
Well, they should be.
Well, they should be, but I was surprised they were there because we had nothing good to say about them, to be perfectly honest. The one that really was there that surprised me, but I think Adam, having been a part of that for years, pushed it. The New York City DEP was part of it. And they have nothing good to say about Central Hudson either, or Con Ed. So there's this initiative going on to try to work with our power companies and, you know, get that power distribution, get that quality power. Whether or not that might be applicable, but I just want to mention it, that it started, it's going on. And we got the Council of Industry and a Pattern for Progress. You may just want to reach out.
That's great. I will reach out to them. I think that's another thing, like we really want to look at our strengths and our weaknesses. If the fact that Central Hudson does not and Con Ed don't have good reputations as energy providers, is that a barrier for businesses coming here? You know, these are things that we want to consider. Yeah.
And it's a huge increase that they're asking for.
Oh, it's out of control.
I mean,
I just want to talk
again.
about how much our bills have gone up.
And I mean, I'll even set aside that because that's and to be fair, that's not just a Central Hudson problem. That's a regulated utility coast to coast problem. Yeah. But this idea to think about this, selling distributed power, or I don't even want to call it that because all these terms are fraught, but resiliency is something that businesses are really more concerned about. There's a round of businesses that say, look, we have we're Google, we're Apple, we're whoever, and we have a 100% green energy goal by 2040 or whatever that goal may be as a corporation, right? Okay, that's great. And how they calculate it is up to them, and how they disclose it is up to them. But more importantly, now we're moving into an era where it's a resiliency issue, where you told me before that I would only have 3 blackouts a year of less than 48 hours. I had 5 that were more than 72. I run a big data center. If my customers in the data center can't get their thing, I hear about it and I don't get paid. So resiliency and sustainability are 2 big issues for business. And if you can build a place where you can provide the resiliency and the sustainability, that's a big infrastructure win.
That could depend on a certain technology as well.
Yeah, that's right.
I think
Maybe that's the 2 columns for your matrix.
24/7, 365 business day.
Yeah, that's right. That
We could have a different kind of
Yes.
more reliable. Right now, we have a generator backup, and it's fine.
Yeah.
But imagine if we didn't have to rely on a different supplier, and we could have that level of capability.
Right. And those decisions are getting made where it's like, do I just build the capacity when I build, or if I'm green, or am I acquire it after the fact, or what am I going to do? So these things.
Do I buy that from? Well, there's many different. I don't want to go into the weeds, but I just see that having control over your energy for my business is essential.
It's essential. Yeah, exactly.
And we have that, but I don't know if it's the best. That's all.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're hoping is to give some recommendations. What could we be doing from, within the scope of the IDA's purview to better incentivize or even support businesses? Maybe we have a zero pilot if a business wants to put up on their own, solar field. I don't know. So
This is exciting.
Yeah.
And I think they'll be moving in the right direction.
So we're excited about this. And
Perfect.
that's all I have on that. Trevor?
Trevor? No? All right.
I'm good.
So that's that on old business. Anything on new business? I don't have anything.
Motion to adjourn.
All right.
Second.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Do we need a break or should we just quickly jump into UCCRC? Yeah. All right. It's 10:21 a.m., September 10th, 2024. I'd like to call to order the meeting of Ulster County Capital Resource Corporation. I'll do a quick roll call. Costa Bahal present. Ms. Rachel Silverman.
Present.
Mr. Stephen Kelly.
Present.
Present. Thank you, Steve Kelly. May I request a motion to approve the minutes from August 5th meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you. Meeting minutes from August 5th have been approved. Any public comment? No public comment. We don't need an executive session. Maybe please note for all business, we should reflect the same discussion that we had during the Ulster County IDA discussion or the meeting, both on the topics of housing policy discussion and task force update for sustainability. On point number 7, we didn't have any new business for IDA, so we don't have any business for new business here as well. And to confirm that's true. Yep. May I please seek a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you so much.